In this video, I will be showing you how to use the Kinetic Wall Toolkit for Maya. To install the tool, copy the text, icon, and Python file to your Maya Preferences script folder. Then open the installation PDF and copy the 3 lines of code highlighted. In a new instance of Maya, open the script editor, then open a new Python tab, paste the 3 lines of code from the installation PDF, and run the script by clicking the double play icons. To add to the shelf, go to File, Save Script to Shelf, and name it. The toolkit is divided in 4 sections. We have the creation tools, the geometry tools, the animation tools, and the selection tools, which have been created in a separate window so you can use them along with the other tools. I'm going to create a new kinetic wall animation and demonstrate some of the features of the toolkit. Then I'll go over each section in more detail and I'll explain how the toolkit works. Okay, I'm going to start by creating a wall with 30 elements in the length and 20 elements in height. I'm going to use the cube as a primitive right now, and let's create a wall. Here we have a status message, which will give us some information about the operations. Like for example, here it took 4.3 seconds to create 600 elements. And also I want to give a bit of offset to the cube, so let's put 0.1 and run the kinetic wall again. And now we have a gap between the cubes. Now let's go to the animation tools and let's apply a preset, maybe from frame 0 to frame 16. And let's just apply this checker rotation on the y-axis. And this is our animation. What we can also do, we can add different animations on different frames. So maybe we can go from frame 61 to 120. And I'm gonna select a different animation, maybe like this column rotation. And let's apply the animation presets between these frames. So now we extend our timeline to 120. We should have 2 different animations. Great, so now what I want to do, this is the fun part. I want to offset the animation in the direction. So I'm going to set the time for it to be from 0 to 120, which are all my keyframes. And I'm going to offset by 1 frame from left to right. And this is what we get. Now the time end has been updated to 149, and that's the last key that the animation wall has after the offset. So if now we play it, the animation is moving from left to right. We can also mix different directions with different offset amounts. So let's do an offset amount of 2 frames, and in this case let's do it from top down. And so the offset animation will be more of in a diagonal direction. So now let's update our time frame to 187. And this is the result. So these are some of the features of the animation tools. We can also undo the history. And this history is only used with this tool. So if you do anything manually, and you want to add it to the history, you have to click this button to add whatever animation you did manually. We can undo a little bit more to go back and use some other of the offsets that I want to show you. So this is our original animation. And one of the cool animation features is this offset center. It can be inward or outward. So let's just try that because that's very fun. And so now we have this offsetting happening at the center. It goes outward. So something very cool. We can also add on top of this maybe a different offsetting, maybe like right to left. And now we'll get a mix of those two with a different offset amount. So yes, you can play with all these different offset options. This goes all the way to 201. Let's undo it, and let's just keep the center offset. So now let's say we want to adjust a few elements maybe. We can go to the selection tools, and we have different selections. We have like the checker inverse. We can select by rows, by columns. We can also select alt or select the inverse. And we can also decrease the selection randomly, and we get this random selection decreased by 50%, and we can decrease it even more. We can also add selections with the shift. We can add the row selection to the checker. So this is what we're selecting. And we can also subtract. So maybe we can, with the control, we can subtract 50% of the selection. And so it's a very cool tool. And also you can assign sets. So in case you select something else, you can go back to your selection. And so you can do multiple animations. So like for example here, let's just do, maybe it will be better to do something that like the scale, so it doesn't affect the keys. You can adjust elements and you can use the selection tools. What we can also do, so here in the selection tools, so you can select the locators and elements, and let me just explain you a little bit how it was working. We have locators, which currently have all the animations, and then we have the elements, which are the shapes in here, which in this case is a cube. So you can select, if you see how everything is organized, you can select this and it will be independent from the locator. So if you see there's no keys in here, but if you go to the locator, all the animation is happening here. So it's like a second degree of control for each element. And that's how it was created, to allow you to maybe rotate it and adjust it and do whatever you want without affecting the animation. And so with this, gives you the power. If you go select by element, if you go and rotate this 45 degree, you still have the same animation, but now you have a different pattern. You can also scale it down or even move it. Let's say we're gonna move it like this. You gotta keep in mind that the animation is happening on the locator, so any rotation will be in the center of the locator. But it's just to show you that you have the extra level of control. Another cool thing about this tool, if we go to the geometry tools, is that we can replace these elements. Let's try a platonic solid. This looks fun. So here on the geometry tools, we can assign the selection as a replacement, which in this case is the platonic object. And here we can have an option to apply to all or apply to selection, and I just wanted to apply to selection. And let's apply on a checker pattern. Let's replace them and see what happens. So now, as you can see, these platonics are bigger than our cubes. That's okay, we can still go in and scale them down. So now we have these two different elements. And we can also do like individual selections of things we want to replace. And maybe like let's assign this. Let's create a new set for this section and let's replace them. So now we have this been replaced. Now you have all your shapes. We can rotate them and maybe scale them. And so now we have different elements, still have the same animation. And so you can mix match elements, animations, selections. So you have a lot of power with this tool. I'm gonna go over the inner workings of the Kinetic Wall Toolkit. Let's start by the hierarchy. Every time we create a kinetic wall group node is created, and this node has some attributes that are crucial to perform the features of the kinetic wall. Inside the group we have locators for each of the element, and inside the locator we have the geometry nodes. And it has been created this way so all the animation can happen on the locator independent of the geometry. And this is so we can use the geometry tools in which we can replace this geometry and keep the animation. I also want to emphasize the Kinetic Wall Toolkit relies on this naming convention of locators and shapes, and this naming convention is crucial to perform all these different features. In this section, we're going to go over the creation tools. You can create by element dimension or by wall dimension. If you want a specific length for the wall, you can input the values and the number of elements that you want the length and height, and it will create them accordingly. So let's do a wall with 60 units in length, 45 in height, 20 elements in length and 50 elements in height. And if you swap between those two, the numbers are proportioned. So if you change this, let's say 2 and 2, and you want maybe like 50, and you go to the wall dimension, it will translate to those values. So they are correlated. And every time you create a new kinetic wall, all the animation that you've done pretty much reset, because you're putting new, either different numbers of elements, and so everything that you've done cannot be translated. So be aware. If you have some animation already done, let's say for example, let's apply the animation presets. So you already have some animation and you don't want to create a new wall, but you may want to adjust the wall. So then you can use the adjust by element dimensions or wall dimensions. So let's adjust this without losing our animation. And let's say we want this maybe like 50 instead of 100. So we can adjust this, and this will resize the wall, but we'll still have our animation. The fifth option is to load selected kinetic wall, and this is very useful when you're working on a file that has been saved before. So let's do that. Let's open a new file. And so let's say you start a brand new Maya instance, so everything here has been reset. What this allows you to do is to load all the parameters from the wall that was saved into here, except the history. The history is not saved. But now that we have loaded, and it will give you a message saying that the kinetic wall group has been loaded. Now, if we use any of the features, it will actually read them. And if we want to adjust the wall, it will also adjust the wall because it has all the parameters needed to have all the features running. Now, I wanted to emphasize that the elements have been capped by 60 in length and 40 in height, and this is mainly for performance issues. Because once you go over these numbers, I figured that it will be really slow. So as you can see, it took 17 seconds to create a wall with 2400 elements. If you do want to go over this, in which I highly do not recommend, I have given you the option to set the max units for the wall. So if you change this text setting, and let's say we want to increase it to 120 by 100, you're gonna have to create a new instance of Maya. So now I loaded a new instance of Maya, and if I want to go to 120, it's changed, and also 100, and it can go over. In this section, we're going to go over the geometry tools, and the main feature of the geometry tools is to replace elements. So we can assign this as a replacement and replace the element. It's gonna copy this along all the locators. So what we're gonna need to do is to scale them down. Let's open our selection tools and select all the elements. And we can scale down these elements. And maybe we can even rotate them. So let's say we want to replace it with a new object. And so if you see the scale between the torus and the cone are about the same, so we kind of want to keep this transforms that we have made on the element. So what we can do, if we select our cone as a new replacement object, here you have options to keep all transform, keep maybe just translations, rotation, or scale, or reset all transforms. So let's keep all the transforms. So as you can see now, if we go and select the elements, they still have the scale and the rotation that we assign. And so let's swap it back with the torus. And let's say now we just want to keep the scale. And so the rotation will be set back to 0. And that's what happened. And now, like for example, let's say we want to replace it with something that is a completely different scale. And so we want to reset all the transforms. So if we assign our cube and we reset all transforms, all our cubes will be resetted. Also notice, like every time you replace an object, your original object will be renamed with the original suffix and also will be hidden. In case you want to retrieve your original object, they're all saved here. And if you are using the kinetic wall cubes, you can use this face projection, in which it will face project every side of the cube, so you can do some cool transitions. This face projection can be a bit slow sometimes, but this is what we get. Now we apply some animations. The face projection creates and assigns materials to each face of the cubes. So with this animation, we can create transitions between images if we assign them to the material. Once you replace the textures, this is what we get. And we can offset it to make it more interesting. And so now this is how the transitions are happening. So this feature only works for the kinetic wall cube, because other geometries do not project very well, and also the transitions are not as nice, so I just keep it strictly for the kinetic wall cubes. Another feature in the geometry tools is that we can lock and unlock elements. The shapes are locked, but you can unlock the elements. And so now we can select the cube and you can unlock them. You can also unlock whatever is selected. So for example, we can unlock the selection and this can be selected, but if you can see, this one they can't because they're locked. In this section, we're going to go over the animation tools. Here we have an option to apply to all or apply to selection. Also, we have animation presets, and we have the checker, column, and row animations on different rotation axes. And these are using some of the selection tools to create these animations. So you have the checker, row, and column. So then we also have our time frame, the time start for the animation and the time end. And so if you apply the animation, it will apply it in this timeline. You can add another animation, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the same amount of frames. So let's do this, and we'll apply it between frame 61 to frame 100. So now you have two animations. Now we also have the reset option, so we can reset the animation. And so you can try all these different presets, and also if you change the timeline, it will go faster or slower. And that's how the animation presets work, and the animation presets applies it to the whole wall. So even though you have the selection, it will apply to the whole wall. Now, let's say we have our animation here. So the offsetting animation also works with this timeline, so you need to put in what frames you want it to affect. So if we offset it by the amount of 1 frame, it will update the end of the current animation to whatever the last key is. So now you have this animation. You can undo, and also this offsetting works with the selection. So you want this to apply to the selection, and we just wanted to have it right here in the middle. Our current animation is doing this. We can apply the offsetting left to right to just the selection. And so this is what happens. And we can have different offsetting to different sections. And just like that, you can mix and match. You can even add on top of those this offset center. It will find the center of whatever you have selected, and the offsetting will happen from there. So if we offset it inward, all the animation will go into the center here. So as you can see, and so now we have 3 different offsets in the wall. And also the reset animation works with the selection. So if you don't want any animation here, you can just reset it. We'll also have the history in which we can undo and redo. And so we can undo all the animations that we've done, and also undo the reset. The only thing, this history records whatever happens with this tool. So if you do a custom animation manually, let's say for example you decided to add some animation here, maybe let's do some rotation here and here, and so you have this other animation that you did manually. So if you undo, that won't get saved, and if you try to redo, it won't show up because you didn't use these tools to record the history. So if you do want to add to the history, let's say let's do our custom animation here. Maybe this goes like this, or do something crazy. And so we have this animation happening. You can add to the current history. And so if we want to undo this, you can do the redo, and that custom animation will be saved, as you can see it. In this section, we're going to go over the selection tools. We have 2 options. We can select locators, and we can also select elements, and we can select them even if they're locked. So you cannot manually select them because they're locked, but you can select them here. We can also select the inverse of our current selection, and we also have some other options, like for example the checker selection, the checker inverse, which is also the same as doing the select inverse, row columns, and also the random, which will give you a random selection, and the decrease 50%, which randomly decreases your selection by 50%. The cool thing about the selection tools is that you can mix and match. So one, you can add to selection by pressing shift. Here I'm gonna add the row. So this is what I have selected. I'm just gonna isolate my selection. I can also deselect with control. So let's deselect the columns, and also I can deselect random and deselect and decrease, and just like that you can combine selections as well. Here you can assign sets. So let's say you have this, and then you do a custom selection here. You have initially 10 sets. You can add more sets with this add selection set. It supports 20 selection sets. And so you can assign different sets. You can select all the sets, and if you right click, you have this option to clear the selection. And those are the selection tools, and these are very useful when they're used in the combination with the animation tools and the geometry tools. Thank you for following along in this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this tool, and if you have any suggestions or questions, please let me know. Also, if you would like to share some of your work, I'll be really interested to see what else can you do with this tool. Thank you very much.